This is the Fantasy Football Unlimited podcast with your host, Kevin Murray.
Welcome to the Fantasy Football Unlimited podcast. On this episode, we have a guest that is one of the most recognizable faces in the fantasy sports industry. From NFL Fantasy and Matthew Berry's Fantasy Life, it's the one and only Marcas Grant. Welcome to the podcast, my friend.
Thank you for having me, Kevin. It's good to be here.
It's an honor to have you on, truly. I last saw you in Canton, Ohio at the Fantasy Football Expo. Always such a special event. So it's great that you can get out there and mix it up. So it's great to have you here.
No, you know what? It's fun. I'm one of the OGs that we sit around and we talk about how it just started as the Kings Classic draft. I go back to the days of when we just used to do a draft and then, sit around at the Buffalo Wild Wings till they kicked us out. So to see it grow into the Expo and what Bob Long has done with it, and the chance to meet so many people that I may know from social media or may not even know at all, it's been really cool. I've been really excited and fortunate to be a part of it.
Yeah, it's always great. It's great to see you there, and I know people enjoy, meeting everybody there. So it's one of those things. It's like you've said, just from my experience going the last few years, like the growth of it has been amazing. I can't imagine being there for just the Kings Classic back in the day, and then see it like this. So pretty cool, pretty good stuff. Now, obviously, you've had a massive impact on fantasy football for several years with your role at NFL Fantasy. Let's go back to where it all began. Like, were you just a huge sports fan as a kid growing up?
Yeah. That was kind of what we did, right? I mean, we sat around. It was very funny because I would go to my best friend's house and we'd play. Like they had sort of the way their neighborhood was set up. We kind of could play whatever, right? So but we were very strict about our seasons. Spring and summer, we played a lot of wiffle ball, right? And we'd throw the ball up against my buddy's garage and we play wiffle ball. Fall and winter was football. Two-hand touch in the middle of the street with a Nerf football, but we were very strict about it. Like if somebody dared to suggest we play football in June, it got vetoed. If somebody wanted to play wiffle ball in November, zero chance. We were very strict about that. But we played, we talked about sports. It was always, hey, did you see the home run so-and-so hit last night? Or did you see this highlight? I mean, I grew up when NFL primetime was the way to see highlights, right? Long before the internet, long before DirecTV or Red Zone or anything like that. Like you watched your local games and then you turned to ESPN at 4 o'clock, 4:30, and you watched NFL primetime to catch you up on everything that happened around the league because you didn't get to see it. But that was pretty much my childhood, playing baseball, playing soccer, all that kind of stuff. I have been a sports fan pretty much as long as I can remember.
Yeah, I can certainly relate to all that, as a kid with sports and everything. But I mean, Chris Berman and Primetime and Tom Jackson, that was it. And to look forward to that, in the afternoons, it was special memories. You're definitely jogging some memories in my mind. Now you were in, is it Vallejo, California? Is that where you grew up?
That's it. Yep, born and raised.
Nice. I went to chiropractic school down in the Bay Area, so we always went up to Six Flags, right? Six Flags Marine World. So
that was my first job when I turned 16. It wasn't a Six Flags then. It was still just kind of this independently owned sort of bootleg SeaWorld kind of place. But yeah, when I turned 16, that was the first job I ever had. I was doing food service, like selling corn dogs and stuff like that. So I know it well.
Was it Marine World? Back then?
It was Marine World Africa USA. So part of it was aquatic animals. So they had, the killer whale and dolphin show, but they also had lions and, camels and stuff like that. I remember when you do the training, the training videos and the HR stuff, they tell you that your job is to protect Marine World assets. And so they're like, so you have to make sure that the animals are safe. And I'm like, look, if there's a fire, I'm pretty sure the lion's going to know how to get out of here. And I certainly, as a 16-year-old high school student, is not going to be trying to, drag a lion to safety in the event of a fire. Right. So just know that.
I love it. So in that region of California, were you like a Niner fan? What were your favorite teams and players growing up?
Yeah, I was definitely always a Niners fan. The Raiders moved from Oakland to Los Angeles, which I know is a familiar theme, moving from Oakland to somewhere else. They moved from Oakland to LA when I was 3 or 4 years old. I vaguely remember going to a Raider game at the Oakland Coliseum as a toddler, which, looking back, like I'm not sure if that was a good idea, but I was a 49er fan, which was very easy because, I grew up in the Joe Montana, Jerry Rice, Steve Young heyday. It was easy to be a 49er fan. They were the only team in the area. They were really good. They were winning. So that was fun and easy. I mean, I was mostly a Bay Area sports fan. The only team I never cheered for in the Bay Area was the San Francisco Giants. But,
Oh, really?
49ers, A's, the Golden State Warriors, who at the time were awful. But those were all the teams that I grew up. I was also I was an A's fan and like a closet Dodger fan. In the years since that has flipped where I'm now a Dodger fan and kind of a closet A's fan. But regardless, I never could get behind the San Francisco Giants.
Hey, that happens. I mean, the A's, obviously back in that day with what you talking like Canseco and McGuire in those days,
they
Dave
were good.
Stewart. That was a phenomenal team.
Yeah, they went to 3 World Series in a row. Meanwhile, the
Yeah.
Giants played in a crummy ballpark. Candlestick Park was the worst. The parking lots were muddy. It was super windy and cold all the time. And the Giants weren't particularly good during that stretch. There were a couple seasons where they lost 100 games. I hated those orange uniforms. There was just nothing to me as a kid that was redeeming about Giants baseball. They had a nice stretch. They won those 3 World Series titles in the 2000s, but I never got behind them.
And to say Candlestick was bad, coming from like an Oakland fan with that stadium, that says a lot.
It was. I mean, Candlestick was not a fun place to go watch games. I remember going there to see some 49ers games, and again, in the winter, aesthetically, it was nice because it sat right on the peninsula, right next to the water, and like if you did overhead shots of it, it was beautiful. But you go there, the parking lots were a mess. It was a slog. It was windy and cold, especially in the winter. If you sat high up enough, you could see the bay, which looked pretty, but you could also see the fog just coming in off the bay. And the fog would come off the water, would roll into the stadium. It might force a fumble, make a couple of tackles, and then just roll on out again. But it was just a miserable place to watch a football game. And I remember when they closed it and they were going to implode it. All these people, the Bay Area people, were having these fond reminiscences of Candlestick, and I'm like, why are we? It was a dump. We always knew it was a dump. It just our team happened to play there, but let's not get all nostalgic about this place. It was awful from the beginning. We can say goodbye to Candlestick Park and it's fine.
Yeah, it's true. That weather front, the weather in the Bay Area is the weirdest thing in the world because everywhere is nice except
San Francisco.
right there. Yeah. So
yeah.
good
Pro
thing
tip,
they moved.
best time to go there is October. That's usually the best part of the year in San Francisco.
Okay, good tip. Good
There you
tip.
go.
So as a sports fan, what's the worst loss you ever experienced?
It's maybe 2 of them. I think no, it's not. It's 1. What am I saying? The worst loss ever was USC Texas in the Rose Bowl, 2005. The Trojans were 1 yard away from back-to-back titles. Lindale White stuffed on 4th down. They give the ball back to Vince Young. And I guess what made it worse was that I sort of knew coming into that game that they were going to have problems. I remember early in that season, Ohio State and Texas played fairly early, maybe week 2 or 3, something like that. And the consensus at the time was whoever won that game was probably going to play USC in the national championship. And I remember watching that game and saying to myself that Ohio State has to win because I don't think we can stop Vince Young.
Yeah.
And I remember that Texas came back late to beat Ohio State. And I just remember being filled with dread because I'm like, I don't know that we can stop Vince Young. And lo and behold, they couldn't. And I remember after that game, I was there at the Rose Bowl for that game. And I remember every night for a week waking up in the middle of the night because I saw Lindale White getting stuffed on 4th down again. And I was just it just gave me a nightmare. I couldn't sleep for it. And even to this day, I can't go back and watch. It is objectively one of the greatest games in college football history, but I cannot watch it again. Will not.
I know.
Watch it again.
That's true. It takes a lot. It took a lot back then to stuff Lindale White because he was a load. But yeah, Vince Young, definitely one of the best college football players we've ever seen. So I can see that game is special. What was your 1B?
Was that my 1B?
What was that other game that you thought about?
1B is probably. This is where it gets a little bit harder. It would be the Warriors and Cavs, the LeBron James block on Andre Iguodala in 2016. That was the Warriors team that won 73 games, set the record for most regular season wins. And I remember I went to game 2 of that series. My dad and I went to game 2 of that series together, and the Warriors blew out the Cavs. They blew out the Cavs in the first 2 games of that series. And I remember walking out of the arena that night thinking, this might be their last home game of the season. You know, the way they beat the Cavs in those first 2 games, it just looked like, you know, that series wasn't coming back to Oakland. And obviously, you know, LeBron and the rest of that team pulled it together. They get back to Oakland for a game 7, which was on Father's Day. I remember I was, you know, back here in LA. My dad went to the game, and we hadn't been able to. We'd been playing phone tag earlier in the day, and finally after the game, he called me from the car on the way home, and I just remember picking up the phone and just saying, "Well, that sucked. Happy Father's Day." You know, because I mean, that team was so great. And I know a buddy of mine who's not a Warriors fan texted a bunch of us, and he was like, "Hey man, if it makes you feel any better, it took an all-time great player making an all-time great play to beat you." And I was like, that doesn't make me feel better at all. So yeah, that's another one that still hurts.
Yeah, sometimes you do have to have those justifications in your mind just to make the coping a little easier. I'm a Seahawks fan, so I was at the Super Bowl when Marshawn did not get the ball, and so I tell myself
I was at that game also.
Okay, oh, what a game! I try to tell myself, okay, I got to see Tom Brady win a Super Bowl, I guess.
That's the thing. The things you tell yourself as a sports fan, right? To try to make it better, but nothing actually makes it better.
Exactly. But there are great moments. What's your favorite sports memory of all time?
My favorite sports memory of all time might be on my 14th birthday, May 1st, 1991. I think I just aged myself. My 14th birthday, it was a Tuesday. My dad let me skip school. We had tickets to an A's game. They were playing the Yankees, and it was the day that Ricky Henderson broke Lou Brock's all-time stolen base record. And I think we got tickets to like a family friend, and they were really great seats. They were behind. He stole third base. We were sitting right behind third base, maybe about 15 or 16 rows up. I remember Lou Brock walked past us, and we got to see Ricky break the stolen base record. I can't remember what inning it was, but stole third, which is kind of amazing that he did it that way. People who are old, of a certain age, remember he picks up the base, he holds the base over his head, he says, "I am the greatest of all time." Which, look, man, Ricky was never one to be shy about how he felt about himself.
No.
But it was amazing. Like, to be there for that moment of history was really, really cool. It was even cooler to go back to school the next day, and all my friends knew where exactly. Before I said anything, they knew I wasn't at school the day before, and they were all like, "You were in Oakland yesterday, weren't you?" I was like, "Yes, I was." So,
that's good.
So yeah, that one is probably my favorite all-time sports memory as a fan.
That's really cool. I like that. I mean, I'll age myself by saying, hey, kids these days, they don't realize like what Ricky Henderson was. Like that, what he did on the base pass, like it's you can't compare it to anything we've seen in the last, how many years. It's unreal.
No, and it's funny because, like, I was a baseball guy first and foremost growing up, and I think if there's a thing that with all the rules changes and stuff happening across Major League Baseball, I think one of the things that has been a positive is that we're seeing stolen bases come back into the game, because I think one of the things that I miss the most about baseball is the 100 stolen base man, right? That has kind of become extinct, and hopefully with these new rules, and the limited amount of pickoff throws and the pitch clock, that maybe we'll start to see somebody get closer to that again. Because you're right, we haven't seen anybody in a long time like Ricky Henderson. I mean, I think the guy who maybe is the closest in terms of power and speed, maybe Ronald Acuna. He's the guy that what did he have? 50-50 this year, or 40-40 for sure.
Amazing.
There aren't a lot of guys like that, and so maybe we can get back to that, because Ricky was definitely a one of a kind.
Yeah, definitely a fun element in a baseball game to have that, to have that occur, right?
100%.
Like have that be an aspect of baseball that you got to pay attention to. It's huge. I love it. So when did you first discover fantasy sports?
The first time I played fantasy football would have been my freshman year in college. So I was a freshman. I joined the student radio station, their sports staff there, and one of the seniors on our staff told us, "Hey, I'm doing a fantasy football league. Do you want in?" So I actually ended up sharing a team. I actually shared a team with two other guys, with two of my friends. We all got together. We're like, okay, well, we've never played fantasy football, but we know football, so let's do this. We'll join in on a team. I remember our first pick was Dan Marino, which it was at a time when people just drafted quarterbacks in the first round. Like, we hadn't thought about draft theory or anything like that. We were just like, quarterbacks throw the ball a lot. They score a lot of touchdowns. Like, we're going to draft Dan Marino. It was late career Dan Marino, but he was still really, really good. I don't remember who else we had on our team. I know that our team was just sort of mediocre. Like, I don't think we made the playoffs that year. There was the one woman in our league who was the commissioner's girlfriend. She only knew Patriots players, but she ended up with some good ones because she got Drew Bledsoe and Ben Coates. He had a couple other players. I remember I'm still friends with her to this day, and she still reminds me that she stomped me in a fantasy football league way back in the mid-'90s. But I always tell people now, especially the kids who don't know any different, that like you had to want it back in the 90s because the internet wasn't a big thing, and it took you forever to dial up and load and there were no games. There was no platform for fantasy football. So when we set our lineups, we would have to call. We get on the phone, we would call the commissioner, leave a voicemail on his answering machine, with our lineup. If there was a late scratch or something, we'd have to get back on the phone, hey, can you take this guy out and put this guy in instead? We had no idea who our opponents started on any given week. And then on top of it, because our commissioner lived well off campus and wasn't there all the time, like sometimes he would fax the updated stats in, maybe to the student newspaper, the student radio station, or a lot of times he'd make a photocopy, and he would like call me in my dorm. It was like a drug deal. He would call me in the dorm and I would like run downstairs. He'd be parked out in front of the dorm, like in his car with the engine running. And I'd just like run out there and he'd hand the stats through a window. And I would go check them out. It's like, we might not get updated stats till like Wednesday, maybe Thursday. Yeah. And so like now it's funny, like if something happens with the app and it glitches and like, somebody doesn't get their touchdown right away, right? Like if they don't get their Isaiah Pacheco touchdown, like instantly, people are like in your mentions, like your app sucks, and I'm like, chill out, man. Sometimes I have to wait till Wednesday or Thursday to get my stats. Like you'll be fine waiting an extra 10 minutes to get that Isaiah Pacheco touchdown.
That is true. I would say that one of the biggest things with fantasy coming online was just the real-time stats, because that even took a while. Even if you're doing an online league, it wasn't until Yahoo, I think, probably started doing that. So do you remember whose content you started to consume back in the day, or did you just kind of go off of what you knew?
I just kind of it was weird. I mean, because like I said, when I started playing fantasy, like this industry, the content creation around it and the analysis around it wasn't really a thing. And I think for a lot of years, like I played a couple years in college, and then I kind of like let it go because it's mostly a social thing for me. And I didn't play for a number of years. But even when I kind of got back into it years later, I wasn't really going online looking for advice. Like I was the guy who literally would buy the Draft Day magazine on the way to the draft, right? Yeah. Mostly so that way I at least have the list of the players, so I could scratch it out and kind of figure out, who was on the board, who was gone, that sort of thing. So like, I think because when I got into it, there wasn't a lot of analysis out there. There weren't a lot of people really doing this on a high level. And to be honest, like I wasn't necessarily being super competitive. Like, yeah, sure, I wanted to win, but for me, it really was kind of a social thing more than anything else. So like, I wasn't necessarily going all in to try to win. I just didn't want to look like a jerk. Like, I didn't want to be the worst team in the league. But literally, I was I would stop by a bookstore, again, old timey words, kids, like bookstore, and pick up a magazine and use that as kind of my, try to flip through the pages like as I'm driving to the draft to kind of get an idea of who I should be taking.
I love that because a lot of people will say, back in the day, get some magazines, but saying that you get a magazine just so you can get the list. That's more realistic than anything. You needed a checklist when you go to your draft.
So I didn't want to be a jerk to like name somebody like, oh, he went 2 rounds ago. Like, oh, I don't want to be that guy.
I'm just glad I drafted a player that was alive,
right? Exactly. Exactly.
Oh, that's fun. So when it comes to the game, like what is it that you love most about playing fantasy?
I just think it's the unpredictability of it, right? Look, I know this whole definition of like game of skill versus game of chance, and there are so many legal whatever. I think for in the end, right? I tell people that what I do is essentially an educated guess, right? Like we don't know what's going to happen from week to week, and I think there's a skill to being able to assemble a roster or being able to assemble a lineup, right? Like you can do all the study. You can, whether you're looking at the stats or watching the film or what have you, there's a skill to that. But once the game kicks off, it's out of your hands. I mean, it is completely a game of chance once everything starts. That sure, you could put together a lineup, right? But you don't know if somebody's going to get hurt in the first quarter, if somebody is just having a bad day, what have you, if a defense has come up with something unexpected to stop a particular player. There are so many unknowns about what's going to happen over the course of 4 quarters, which in reality is why we watch sports at all, right? It is, as I had an old boss mentor who was just like, look, most movies, most TV shows, you get a sense of how things are going to go, right? You can sort of figure out, all right, man, like the hero's journey at the end of this, like, the main character might have a tough time in the middle, but in the end, generally the good guy's going to come out on top. Sports, you just never know, right? I mean, the fact that you asked me about my most painful sports, the fact that the Golden State Warriors could win 73 games in a regular season and not get the one win that they needed at the end of the year to win a championship. Like nobody would have seen that coming. I just think there's that unpredictability of it that makes sports fun and what makes fantasy fun, because it kind of gives us that thing to be interested in for games that we generally might not care about. Like I don't necessarily know that I would care about, say, a Browns-Texans regular season games. I'm not a fan of either one of those teams. But, when I got Nico Collins going, trust me, I'm a lot more interested than I would have been in any other situation.
No, that's good. Good point. Now, as a Mariner fan who once won 116 games,
Yeah.
I would have said be leery about that 73 or 75 win team.
Yeah, you know what? If I had known, I would have come to you about this. Yes.
Oh, no, that makes a lot of sense. Now, with fantasy, like, are there favorite settings that you have or formats that you love to play?
I think I'm more of a traditional guy. I've come around to PPR. I do like the fact that we are moving more toward like half point PPR, because I think full point is a little too much. There's no world you can convince me that catching a football by itself should be the equivalent of running 10 yards, especially because the rules are geared toward offenses and geared toward throwing the football. So half point PPR I think is a nice compromise, but I do still like the one quarterback leagues. I know that, I think I'm in the minority there, right? But I think because a 12-team league, 14-team league, starting one quarterback, we can't find 32 good quarterbacks across the United States. I think in reality, we probably have 12 to 15 good quarterbacks across fantasy football. So I think one quarterback leagues, I think still give you enough to think about when you're drafting, when you're playing the waiver wire. I do think the need for a couple of flexes, and I think we should all just move toward 3 wide receivers. I think that should kind of be a standard now at this point. I've played in some leagues that, more like home leagues or casual leagues where it's still 2 wide receivers. And I find myself like with all these guys on my bench, I'm like, how do I play all these receivers? Like, so I think 3 wide receivers, a couple of flexes. I'm starting to come around on tight end premium just because the position, I think that allows us to appreciate the guys like, Travis Kelce, Sam Laporta. We can appreciate those guys, but we can also still, find some guys to kind of help out, right? Like if you're forced to stream, at least having a tight end premium means you can plug a guy in there and maybe still get a decent number out of him.
That's great. What do you think about the kickers and defenses and leagues that are abandoning those?
I'm fine with kickers and defenses. Also, I think that having that randomness in there, I think levels the playing field a little bit more. I think what also frustrates me about it is that I haven't heard a good reason to eliminate kickers and defenses that isn't some version of, well, I just don't know how to rank them, or I just don't know how to predict them. Like that's the whole argument against that they're unpredictable. And I'm like, well, but that's part of the fun of the game. I'm like, if we're just going to narrow this down to positions and players that we can predict, then eventually we're just going to get to quarterbacks, wide receivers, and maybe a handful of running backs, right? And I just think we're going to narrow it so much that it's just not going to be quite as fun. I do like the randomness there. I think having, it's like I talk about with video games, right? Like if you're the best, fighting game player in the world, it's not the second best player you should be worried about because they're going to follow sort of protocols and you kind of understand what they're going to do. It's the button masher that you should be worried about. The person who's just smashing things and they don't know how they shot that rocket at you, but they did and it blew you up. That's sort of what kickers and defenses are a little bit. It's a little bit of the button mashing in there. And I just think that potential for chaos is fun. And I don't think we should get that out of the game.
I love it. That's a good point for sure. I love your stance on the PPR thing too. That was always so hard for me playing this game for so long to think, like it's not equal to 10 yards.
It's just
like,
not.
People like points. People want points, so I'm with you. Half PPR, okay, you get some PPR. But these days, I don't think wide receivers need any boost. Like back in the day, that's kind of where it came from, right?
100%. Yeah, that's exactly what it was. Because running backs were so dominant, where it would be easily the first round would be all running backs. Maybe one receiver sneaks in there somewhere. So we created PPR to sort of level the playing field. And now the game is strictly about passing. So that, PPR has made it that the wide receivers get maybe way too much value because of that.
Yeah. For sure. Now, do you have a league that you consider like your main primary league?
I do. It's a league of guys that are guys I've known since, a lot of them known since high school, maybe even a little bit earlier.
Nice.
In fact, we just finished our 20th season of this league.
Awesome.
And it's been cool because, there were a handful of guys that maybe after high school I had sort of lost touch with or what have you. Even at the college I kind of lost touch with. And so it was kind of nice to kind of, go through like see the list of emails and be like, oh, there's so-and-so. I haven't talked to him in ages. So that part has been pretty cool. So like that is probably the one league that I really care about the most. I came up just short. I had cobbled together a team this year. Like it wasn't a great team. I had a bunch of injuries. Somehow got hot at the end of the regular season to able to sneak into the playoffs and won a playoff game actually despite getting like zeros from a couple of guys in my lineup, getting big performances elsewhere. So I thought maybe, just maybe, I could be a team of destiny, but ended up coming up short in the semis. So we will try again next year.
I love it. Are you guys able to do live drafts, or is that like just been in the past?
No, it's in the past because we are all scattered around the country.
Yeah.
A lot of them are still in the Bay Area, but I'm here in LA. I have a friend who's in New York. I think we got somebody down in Texas. So we're unfortunately a little bit spread out, so we can't do the live draft thing.
Yeah, live drafts are so special, and it does so much for leagues. But when you got a league that's 20 years in, like you don't need as much of that because
exactly.
The connections, the bonds are already there. So that's cool. Now, do you have like who's your biggest rivalry in fantasy that you like in a league, whether it's an industry league or that home league, that like if you win, it's the most rewarding, and if you lose, it's the most painful?
I don't know if I have anybody that like I just sit and grind over all the time. I will say this, in the NFL Fantasy Live League, we do all sort of enjoy beating Adam Rank because in that league for our show on the NFL Network, Rank is sort of the Patriots. He has won it more than anybody else. He is usually in contention year in and year out. And so, it's definitely not a thing where we're like, we don't make a large point out of it. And, we're not necessarily trash talking a little bit, but it does feel good to beat Rank because, he enjoys being the fantasy maverick where he will zig where everyone else zags. And no matter what, it always seems to work out. And he always seems to be very, very competitive. So, it is sort of like a little notch in the belt, right? A little tip of the cap when you're able to beat Adam Rank because he's really good at this fantasy thing.
Yeah, and go figure, huh? I love it. Now you you obviously you went to school. You went to school at USC.
Mm-hmm.
decided to go down the path of journalism as a career. What inspired that originally for you?
As a kid, I always wanted to be a writer. Writing stories, writing movies, whatever. Just wanted to be a writer. But then hearing stories of all these great writers who died penniless and insane, and I'm like, well, I could do journalism. Like I might not make a ton of money, but it seems like they still have their sanity, so that seems to be a plus. And actually, when I was in high school, I thought I was going to do serious hard news, right? Like I thought I was going to be the anchor at a national news. That was my goal, to be the anchor at a national nightly news show, right? To be Tom Brokaw or Dan Rather or somebody like that. I thought that's what I wanted to do. Got to SC. First day on campus, ended up meeting with some people. We joined the radio station, the sports staff, and I kind of hung around those guys, and was like, this is like more fun, like talking about sports, because it reminded me of what I did at home with my friends. And at that point, I realized like I could probably make a living doing it. So I sort of pivoted my focus away from maybe doing straight news to kind of doing more sports. And from there, it just kind of blossomed into kind of doing sports news. I did some radio play-by-play for a couple of years, started hosting radio shows. I mean, most of my background before I got to the NFL was radio, sports media in some form or other. But yeah, it started as just kind of wanting to be a writer and sort of morphing itself into where I am now. I don't write quite as much as I used to, maybe as much as I'd like to, because the podcasting and the TV takes up a lot of time, but it is still something that's kind of near and dear to me.
Was USC a college when you were a kid that you always wanted to go to?
No. I remember watching them on TV as a kid. I vaguely remember Marcus Allen's Heisman year. I think it was 1981. And I remember it I remember there's a song they play called Tribute to Troy. You can Google it. But like, if you've watched USC, if you've been to a game where USC is playing, like the band plays it after every single play. We drive our opponents insane with it because we won't stop playing it. But I remember hearing that song as a kid and thinking that was like super cool. And then I remember seeing Marcus Allen play first at SC and then with the Raiders and being in awe because he was the first other person I'd heard of in my life named Marcus, like me. Okay. So that sort of like was kind of cool. But I never really thought about going to school there. Yeah. I remember when they first sent me something too in high school. They sent me a little brochure or whatever to consider. And I remember looking at it, getting in the mail, looking at it, and thinking to myself, I don't play football. Like, what do they want me for? But the more I kind of researched it and like looked at their programs, the fact that it was in LA, it was in a big city that was far enough away from home that I was away from home, but close enough that I could kind of get back home easily when I wanted to. Like all of these things sort of worked into it. And I will tell you that all these years later, I do not regret the decision.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, USC is I got good memories with USC. I remember like early on, like loving college football. I remember when Rodney Peete and Troy Aikman had their little thing, and then Barry Sanders just blew up the Heisman race that year. But it was Harold Miner to me. Like as a kid, I found this guy and like, the next Jordan, and I kept, I'd always watch anytime he was up there on ESPN, I'd record the game and I grew up, in the Seattle area, so UW was my team, but I loved Harold Miner and USC. It didn't work out for him essentially, but
no, he was
amazing,
sadly.
So good.
Yeah, I remember too. I remember like my freshman, because I missed Harold Miner at SC by maybe a year or two. It wasn't very long, but I missed him. But I remember being on a flight home, an airline flight home, and I think it was like maybe Thanksgiving or something. I just ended up sitting there, and I'm about to put my headphones on and start listening to some music, and this guy sitting next to me strikes up a conversation. And I'm only, I'm not really the chatty type, but he wants to talk to me, and we start talking. I mentioned that I'm a student at USC, and he says, "Hey, I'm a photographer." He's like, "I got pictures of Harold Miner's last game." Harold Miner's last game was in the tournament, first round tournament loss to Georgia Tech. Yeah, they lose. Right. SC loses on a buzzer-beating three-pointer by a guy named James Forrest. It was the only three-pointer James Forrest ever hit in his college career. That one to beat USC. And this guy tells me, he's like, I have pictures of Harold Miner's last game. He's like, it's like a 3-shot sequence. It's inbounding, it's the Forrest shot, and then it's Harold Miner walking off the floor with his head down. And I'm like, why would I want these photos? why do I want pictures of USC losing a game? At which point I couldn't put my headphones on fast enough. And like let's just get to Oakland because I don't want to sit next to this guy anymore.
that's so funny, but it was cool. I did recently read that story, about his daughter at Stanford and volleyball. It's really cool. So aside from the USC experiences, you obviously you got Pete Carroll right in that run. What was that experience like? Being a fan of that program at that time.
It was cool. It was a little bit of jealousy because. Again, I missed a lot of things by a year or so, right? I remember because when I was a student there, I think it was the worst 4-year stretch in USC football history. We were a mediocre team at best. I never saw in person as a student a win over UCLA. We lost to them all 4 years. I think we finally broke a long losing streak to Notre Dame, but we were just kind of a mediocre program at the time. And I remember after the Paul Hackett years, they fired Paul Hackett because it was not great. Not a lot of people know this, but Pete Carroll was like 5th or 6th choice for USC. He was way down the list because at the time, he was just considered to be a guy who washed out of the NFL. And I remember thinking that when they finally settled on him, I'm like, I don't know, man. Like, he sort of flamed out with the Jets and the Patriots. He was not a great NFL head coach. Like, I don't know what to. And like, he was perfect. He had that perfect attitude. He's got that energy that definitely connected, I think, with the college athletes. On top of it, he is a damn good defensive coach. You know that. You're in Seattle. You've seen him. He's a damn good defensive coach. Really built up that defense. And then on top of it, turned out to be an amazing recruiter. And I think some of it was the energy. Some of it was definitely the coaches he had in. But one of the things Pete did was he said, I'm going to build kind of a metaphorical fence around Los Angeles. And I'm going to start getting all these really talented kids in this big metropolitan area to come. And so he kind of built up that pipeline. And then once it got rolling, it sort of recruited itself, because one of the things that you started to notice, and a lot of programs do this, but you started to see those guys who had gone on from SC to the NFL kind of being recruiters on their own. Like, I really being struck with, Carson Palmer when he got to Cincinnati, seeing how many interviews he would do, press conferences he would do wearing USC stuff. Seeing Keyshawn Johnson going out, and the way they got Mike Williams from Florida was because Keyshawn was playing down in Tampa and helping recruit the Tampa area. Having guys like Clay Matthews go out and sort of be ambassadors for USC. So you had these guys who not only had great college careers, but were also having great pro careers, go out and sort of be ambassadors for their area and helping the Trojans recruit. So if Pete Carroll wants a guy from Ohio, it's great when Pete Carroll shows up there, but also if Carson Palmer lobs that kid a phone call and says, hey man, you should really consider going there, that means a lot. And so it was incredible to watch. And I remember going on campus and telling some of the students there, hey man, enjoy this, because when I was here, it was miserable. We weren't very good. We were a 6-5, 7-5 team every year, and maybe we go to a decent bowl. Enjoy this. And so even not being a student but being a fan not that far removed, I'll say this: it was fun to a point. It got to the point though where, and I think fans of good teams will say this, where it became on a given week, if they won, it was more relief because they were expected to win. And if they lost, the sky was falling. And if they would lose a game, if they would get upset, I wouldn't watch ESPN for a week. I'm I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to see highlights of it. I'll turn everything off and we'll just get ready for next Saturday. And so that, I think looking back, that part is fun. In the moment, it's kind of stressful.
Yeah, I know. I can see where the pressure would definitely rise when you have those expectations. But speaking of high pressure, you've got a career in professional television and in contributing with NFL fantasy. What's that been like for you? I guess starting back to how did the opportunity present? And you didn't do any fantasy content prior to going to NFL, right?
Oh, no.
Okay. How did that all turn out?
Yeah, I always tell people that this job found me more than I found it. I didn't go into it. I had been working in radio for a long time, and the company I'd worked for, I'd been doing some radio with what was then Sporting News Radio. They've changed their name, I think, several times since then. But I remember the company was bought by a guy from Houston. He moved the operation to Houston. I decided I would just try to stick it out in LA and figure out what I was going to do with myself. A coworker suggested that I apply to the NFL because he was doing some seasonal stuff with them. He said they're always looking for people, especially in season. So I literally just went to like NFL.com/jobs or whatever the link was. Applied for like 5 or 6 things, most of which I was not qualified for. But I was, basically spending all my time sitting on my couch, freelance writing and watching reruns of, Law and Order, SVU and stuff. So this was 2011, and at the time, the lockout was happening, and people didn't even know if there was going to be a season. So I applied for a bunch of jobs, didn't really hear back from anything, had kind of forgotten about it. Then I got a call asking if I wanted to write about fantasy football, and I was like, does it pay? And they said, yeah. So I said, sure. So I interviewed, went through the interview process. Like maybe 2 weeks after that, I remember turning on ESPN, seeing that the lockout was over. The players union and the league has come to an agreement on a new CBA. We're not, the lockout's over. We're going to have a season. I remember maybe an hour after seeing that, getting a call saying I had been hired as a fantasy copyright or copy editor, basically. And again, that was August 2011, and here I am 12, almost 13 years later, having kind of grown from being basically a glorified copy editor to where I am now.
That's outstanding. Now, talk to me about your experience with Fantasy Life. Like, that's obviously a new venture these last few years, couple years. What's that experience been like for you?
It's been great. I mean, they've been a lot of fun. I was approached by Elliot Christ and Jordan Fiegelman a couple of years ago. Just kind of out of the blue. I had kind of knew, I had known about Fantasy Life. I remember the app and obviously Matthew's book, which spawned this whole thing. Didn't really expect that, they would be interested in me. Hadn't even crossed my mind one way or another, good, bad, or indifferent. But Elliot reached out to me, said, hey, if you're going to be in Canton, we should get together. We should meet. So I did, flew out. I was going out to Canton anyway. We were able to connect with them. We ever worked out a deal. It was very funny because randomly one night, a bunch of us were standing out in front of the hotel talking, what have you. That was where I met Dwayne McFarland for the first time. I had seen Dwayne's work. I thought it was very cool. It was good to meet him. He seemed like a really cool dude. I meet with Elliot Christ, decided, hey, man, this seems like a really cool opportunity. I'd love to be on board. And Elliot comes back to me and says, hey, do you know Dwayne McFarland? And I was like, funny you ask, because I just met him like 2 nights ago. Seems like a cool dude. And he's like, hey, we want you to do a podcast together. I'm like, sweet. But it has been great. They've been a lot of fun to work with. I think they've put together a great team. I mean, with guys like Dwayne, Ian Hartitz, Peter Overzet, Jake Trowbridge, Cooter Doodle. I can go on and on and on. Kendall Valenzuela. There's so many people. Yeah. And then this year to be able to do a show with Matthew Berry, with Golden Tate. We all did a show together. It's been a lot of fun. I will tell you that it's very different. Like I couldn't be with 2 more different organizations. Like the NFL, I mean, it's the NFL, right? It is, it's on sale. It's huge, right? It's also kind of corporate. Whereas like Fantasy Life, it's very much, it still feels like a startup and everybody's really cool. And not that people at the NFL aren't cool. I don't want to make it sound like that, but they're just very, very different in how they operate. It couldn't be two more separate organizations, but they've both been a lot of fun to be a part of.
That's cool. And that sounds like a great mix. Yeah, great people there for sure. A big fan of everything they're doing. And that brings me to, talk about like for you, the fantasy community, you probably did at one point, you didn't know it existed, right? I didn't at one point either. So what has the support of the fantasy community meant to you? And talking about the expo, like what has that experience been like for you these last couple of years?
It's been amazing, honestly. It's just been so cool, especially the last couple of years. One, to meet a lot of people. That was my big takeaway from the first year I did the expo, which is 2 years ago now. To meet a lot of people that I only knew from social media, right? To prove that you are actually real people out there and not just Twitter feeds or with an avatar that gets changed every so often. Yeah. So it's kind of meet and connect with some of those folks was really, really cool. This past year, what was fun was, again, to meet new people, but now to like see people again, right? Because you feel like you've built a relationship on some level with some of these folks. To see those people that maybe I'd met the year before and kind of reconnect with them, or to see people that I've known for a long time, right? I mean, guys like Matt Harmon, who and I have been friends for a long time, and we don't get to see each other in person, to like be able to hang out with him, to go hang out with JJ Zacharyson, who I hadn't seen in a while, Rich Rebar, those kind of guys, the guys who've been doing this for a while, but we don't get to connect regularly just because of lives and schedules and locations and that sort of thing. So it really is become, I think it's the event of the summer for the fantasy industry. I think it's sort of the I don't know, for lack of a better term, it's like fantasy Coachella. Is sort of what it is, and so like that part of it has been really, really cool. And I'm always just grateful that folks want to, hang out and chat with me and that sort of thing. So I really have enjoyed being there. Everybody's been super, super cool. I'm always eternally grateful for that.
Yeah, it's a special event. Bob's put together a heck of an event that everyone's looking forward to every year. So what's been your biggest challenge like along the way over these years?
I think for me, it's sort of trying to keep up with where the analysis is going. I mean, I think it's changed so much in the 12. I just finished my 13th season. So the 12 years, 13 seasons I've been doing this. When I first started, fantasy really was kind of a July through January proposition, right? That once the regular season ended, maybe you did a week or two of wrap up. And then I knew that, when I first started the NFL, we would do maybe a week or two of wrap up. And then we immediately started on doing our draft guide for the next year. But we weren't putting out content really like that. Maybe we write a blog occasionally. We do some stuff during free agency. We might do a little bit of stuff during the draft. But it was not the year-round sort of thing that it is now. And so, sort of keeping up with where it's going, that one, it is more year-round, and that now, we've got what I call the draft industrial complex that has come along with it, right? That like those folks are gearing up right now. We're going to go through all of free agency, the advanced analytics that we're doing, the mixture of film study that has come into it. I mean, I think you have so many good people on both sides of that thing, and I think for me, I will admit, I am not a tape grinder. I am not necessarily a spreadsheet warrior, but I feel like what I want to do and what I hope I do decently is know enough about both sides that I can sort of present it to an audience. I think working for the NFL, it comes with the realization that you're talking to a wide range of audience, that you're talking to people who are hardcore, right? Like I think if you're really, really hardcore, you are going to outlets like you guys. You're going to football guys. You're going to establish the run. You're going to fantasy life. You're going to fantasy points, right? If you are really, really hardcore about it, you're probably going the extra mile to find extra content. But there are a lot of people out there who are just playing in home leagues or office leagues who are, kind of casual. They just don't want to look like jerks. And so having to sort of learn how to talk to that wide audience, I think, has always been a challenge, especially as there is more analysis and more stats and a deeper level of understanding about the fantasy game, being able to kind of distill all that down and still be able to present it. Like I always talk about, like, I want to be able to talk to guys like you who know all this stuff, and know it on a deeper level, but I also have to talk to people like my wife who plays in a league who doesn't necessarily know, ADP doesn't mean anything to her, right? Or air yards or anything like that. But she still wants to win her office league. And so that has been a challenge, I think, especially as we get deeper into the analysis and the understanding of how not only the NFL works, but then how it translates to fantasy as well.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense because I mean I think that most people that play the game, the largest percentage of people that play the game, they just rely on what they get from the host platform, whether they're playing on NFL or playing on ESPN or playing on Yahoo. They don't know that this whole world of all these deep diving fantasy content creators are. So for you, you're talking to two widely different types of consumer, so I can see why that would be a challenge for sure.
Yeah, and it's funny too, because I always say to people, especially in this industry, like if you start getting into the content creation industry for fantasy and you start playing in these more competitive leagues and that sort of thing, I always remind people, man, go draft with civilians, right? Like go do some drafts with civilians where there are 3 quarterbacks gone in round 2. right? Or
Yeah.
where somebody inevitably is going to take a second quarterback before they get like a tight end or a wide receiver too. Like it will throw you off a little bit. Like it'll have your head spinning a little bit, but it's kind of good to kind of ground you and remind you that like, again, it's back to the whole button mashing thing, right? Like
Yeah.
when you do drafts with other analysts, you kind of have a good idea of how things are going to go, right? Like, maybe you get a Josh Allen in round 3 or a Patrick Mahomes in round 3. But everybody's going to kind of wait on a quarterback. You know that there's not going to be any tight ends that go crazy early. But when you draft like in a home league with people who don't study this stuff 12 months a year, those drafts get wild, and it's kind of good to kind of remind you, about kind of how things go in the real world, so to speak.
For sure. For sure. Now, what do you enjoy most about what you're doing in the industry? Is it the podcasting? Is it video? What's your favorite aspect of what you do?
Yeah, it's probably the podcasting. Like I said, I did a lot of radio before I landed here, and I still love it. And this is sort of the closest thing to radio, at least that I get offered between the NFL and fantasy life, and I do enjoy it. It's fun. It's a chance to be maybe a little bit more free form, kind of talk about some random things, and like this time of year especially, can really do some kind of more fun things. Like we'll talk fantasy, but we'll also talk about movies. Like last summer, I made Michael Florio watch a whole bunch of action movies he had never seen, and we talked about them. I think a couple years ago, I did a Game of Thrones segment, because let's be honest, we can talk a lot. We get to like April or May. Probably May or June, I guess, and we're out of takes.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're out of takes. Like we've talked about free agency and the draft, and like now we're just waiting for the season to start. So why not have some fun with it? So I think the podcasting is what I love the most.
I feel like as a consumer, like you connect. The podcasting allows you to just really connect with the people where you get to know them on a different level. It feels like loyalty in listeners and from consumers to a podcast is just much higher than a lot of other forms of content.
Yeah, I think so. And I remember the first time we did a listener league on our podcast, and it was the first time that you intellectually understand that people are listening to you and taking your advice. You kind of know that, but until you actually start doing a draft with your listeners is when it really clicks in. Because I remember, myself and Alex Gelhar, who now is off, doing wonderful things in his second career. But I remember we were doing a draft, and I remember we were staring at each other because all these guys that we kept saying were sleepers, that we thought were like, hey, I'm going to wait and I'm going to draft this guy. They all kept going like a round or two earlier than we were trying to draft them, because it's like, oh yeah, that's right. We say this on the show and these people listen to our show, so they know who we want to draft. Like it was such an eye opener. It was just kind of that reminder that, oh yeah, people actually do listen to this. But it's to your point that, yeah, you get to connect and you get to have people that sort of have kind of a relationship sort of with you based on what you're doing.
For sure. What at this time, like, what are you most grateful for?
I'm just kind of grateful to kind of have gotten to where I am. Like again, like the NFL has been an amazing experience. I never thought I'd be doing fantasy as a career. So from a professional standpoint, to go from where I was being just, like I said, a glorified copy editor to now being on a show that, does well on NFL Network, on a podcast that does well in terms of downloads, to be able to work with Matthew Berry, right, the biggest name in all of fantasy sports, that from a professional standpoint has been amazing. On a personal standpoint, working at the NFL is how I met my wife. We have a 4-year-old son. So it's been great for me on a personal standpoint as well. So I think I'm just kind of grateful for the opportunity. I think people always ask if there's like things you would do differently in your life and your career. And I always say no, because in the end, what has happened has sort of led you to where you are. That's really what I believe. And so, this has kind of led me to a situation where like I have, I've been able to thrive professionally. I've been able to thrive personally. So I think that's more than anything is just kind of what I feel so grateful for.
I love it. Now, 2023 is just, it's obviously it's in our rearview mirror, but we still got the Super Bowl ahead of us.
Mm-hmm.
What's your Super Bowl prediction?
I'm trying to think of what well, my Super Bowl prediction for this year, the one I had at the beginning of the season, is no more because I think I had the Bengals beating the Eagles. That was before the whole Joe Burrow injury situation happened, and then the Eagles flaming out at the end of the season. So I'm gonna go back. Part of it's a little bit of a homerishness. I think the Niners and the Ravens. So we're gonna go 1 seeds. Which absolutely never happens, right? Like the idea of a couple of 1 seeds making it to the Super Bowl, it seems easy, but it never really happens. But I'm going to say that the Niners get there and that the Niners get their revenge for several years ago when they got beat by Joe Flacco. Remember that was the game where the power went out at the Superdome. There was that long delay of the power outage, and then I just remember the end of that game, the Niners had 4 shots to win it. John Harbaugh calls a timeout on what would have been a bootleg touchdown run for Colin Kaepernick. And then they finish out with like 2 or 3 end zone corner fades to Michael Crabtree, which is absolutely miserable. So I think they get their get back. And then the legend of Brock Purdy grows, right? I mean, if Tom Brady was a 6th round pick and you see what he did, Brock Purdy, he's Mr. Irrelevant. So why not grow that legend too?
Yeah, and it's revenge back then, but also from this season. I feel like the best thing that happened to the Niners this season was that loss, because the ball did not bounce their way that game, and it probably will help them kind of regroup and refocus. So it's a good prediction.
Yeah. By the way, speaking of that game, because at some point the Niners were getting drilled, and that was the fantasy semis. I needed Zay Flowers to come through and maybe pull me from behind to get me to the championship. And at some point, the Niners are getting thumped. And I'm like, well, let's just get Zay Flowers the ball then. If the Niners are going to win. And I think I ended up coming up like half a point short. It's like I just needed like 1 more catch, basically. But at some point, it was like the Ravens got the ball back. They had like a multiple score lead. I'm like, they're not going to throw the ball. They're just going to run. And I'm not going to get my Zay Flowers point.
That's fantasy for you, right?
That is right.
In the game, you start rooting for the opposite players. I love it. But as for your journey in the industry, like, can you name a few people that have just had a massive impact on you along the way?
I mean, like I would be remiss not to mention the fact like Michael Fabiano was the guy who hired me. Way back at the NFL all those years ago. But I mean, I really do think like Adam Rank has been a big part of the journey, right? He's been so much fun to work with all these years. Bob Harris, I think I don't know that you can be in this industry for any amount of time and not have been touched by Bob Harris at some point. I mean, just the guy who has been incredibly encouraging throughout my time here. Like, I mean, Bob is great to just break you off a text message just saying that, he saw something or read something that he really loved. He's just been amazing. And I will always remember the time that we had together with the group that we called ourselves the Fantasy Stronghold. And it was myself, Matt Harmon, Alex Gelhar, Matt Franciscovich, James Coe. We had a really, really fun thing going. We had a really good pod. I mean, I think we really built that pod to the point that there's still people who listen from that era who remind us every once in a while of some bits and goofy things we did. And this has been, I mean, now we're going on 8-9 years since we were all together. It's been a while, I think, at this point. But it was one of those things where, they always say you don't know what you have until it's gone. I think part of what made the Stronghold really fun for me is that I think we all realized in the moment that it was kind of a special time, that it wasn't going to last forever, but what we were doing was something really special and really fun. And I appreciate not only what we created together as a group, but the fact that all these years later, we are still friends and we are still in contact. And, when Matt Harmon got married, we were all in his wedding, as groomsmen or officiants. So like that's one of those things. I mean, I guess it goes also to the things I feel, blessed about, like that I've been able to make some really good, hopefully lifelong friends around doing this thing. And those are definitely a handful of them.
Yeah, it's a heck of a group right there. Definitely a team of people that won a lot of fantasy football championships.
I hope so.
Yeah, I'm sure, for sure. And what do you have? Obviously, your approach or your arrival in fantasy is a little different than a lot of people out there that are just hoping to create content and get somewhere. But you've seen a lot. You've been in the industry. You've seen a lot of people rise up in the industry. What advice do you have for people that want to get more involved in the fantasy space?
So I think it's changed, right? Because I think early on, my advice to people was, hey, find that thing that no one is doing or no one is doing well and use that as your path to carve out. But I think because the industry has grown so much, I don't know that there's a thing out there that no one is doing. Like I think we've covered all the angles at this point. So my advice now to people is learn as many different skills as you can. Right. I don't remember, it was one of those years on Hard Knocks, right, where one of the guys was like, the more you can do, the better your chance to make the team. And I think in terms of doing this fantasy thing that we're doing, this analysis thing, learn as many different sides of this as you can. Like learn, the writing part, learn the podcasting or the on-camera part, but also learn the kind of business side or how it is to build your own platform or build your own thing. That is a thing that I know that I can do better, that I want to learn more of. I tell people that in some ways I might be the last person you should ask for advice because I walked into a ready-made situation, right? My first job in this industry was with the NFL. And I don't say that bragging. I say that as a way to say that, like, for the people who have built something from the ground up, right? Like I look at what Ray Garvin is doing with Destination Devi. I look at, I see those guys over at Fantasy Points, right? Like I worked with Graham Barfield for a short time at the NFL, and those guys, what they've been able to build up there. That's a thing that I want to learn how to do more of, because as much as I love the NFL, I don't know that I'm going to spend the whole rest of my life there. I would like to kind of build something on my own, and maybe it's not even in the fantasy space. I don't know. I'm still working all that out in my head. But I think the more skills you can learn, both creating content and creating a business side of things, I think that's going to help you, especially as we see networks laying off people, as we see maybe less and less investment on a corporate level on this, but more and more investment on a smaller individual level. More and more of these platforms start to rise up. I think the greater your skill set is, the greater your chance of having success in this industry.
Great advice for sure. Now, Marcus, is there anything you want to share before we close things out here on this episode?
I don't know, man. I appreciate you having me on. It's been a lot of fun. I don't know. I'm looking forward to sort of enjoying the off season a little bit. I'll still be doing stuff, doing a pod, with Michael F. Florio over at the NFL. Still doing stuff throughout the off season with Dwayne McFarland at Fantasy Life. But using this time to kind of maybe either do some content that is sort of out in left field compared to the fantasy stuff. And then actually just looking forward to kind of dad life too in this off season. It's funny. One thing I have learned, one last little quick story. I remember telling somebody this, that at this point, I used to in the off season, like, when I was still single and had no kids, would go hard and like spend a lot of time grinding film and watching and learning stuff. Now I've kind of gotten to the point that I am like that 10 or 12 year NFL vet, like, the guy who knows his body well enough to do, can stay in good enough shape just to get ready for training camp and then go from there. Like you get to the point where you've been in this league for a while, you've been doing it, and you know that you just can't go hard 12 months a year because you're going to burn yourself out. Like I've gotten to that point where I'm like, okay, I know what I need to do to kind of stay up on things, to know just enough so that when we get to the season and we're really ready to go, that I can make that grind. I'm too old and I got a kid. I just can't grind like that for 12 months a year anymore. So I'm looking forward to kind of letting off the gas slightly. I am not all gas, no brakes. I'm a lot of gas, but some brakes too, because I'm old, man. I got to rest.
Well, grind in that fatherhood life, right? Because that's special, and it goes so fast. Our daughter's 11, and time flies. So enjoy every stage. 4 is an amazing age, and you got some great years ahead of you. So enjoy every aspect of that. Now, when it comes to finding you for viewers, listeners, where do they find Marcas Grant out there?
Best place usually is Twitter. Although I don't know. I may be tweeting less in the off season. It's time to save my mental health and back away. But still doing the NFL Fantasy Football Podcast. Also still doing stuff at Fantasy Life. You can find those, of course, all the places you find podcasts. Go over to fantasylife.com while you're at it too, because not only am I doing the show with Dwayne, still a lot of good stuff. I mentioned Dwayne, Ian Harditz, Peter Overzet, and they have they have a completely free, I should say, newsletter you can sign up for at Fantasy Life. I'll say this. It never gets old to me to check my email every morning and see that I have an email from Matthew Berry, even though it's not Matthew actually sending it. His name's on the newsletter, so sign up for it. And you can get an email from Matthew Berry in your inbox every day. It's kind of cool.
That's awesome. I love it. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Marcus. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I can't wait to see what's ahead for you in 2024.
Absolutely. Appreciate it, Kevin. And hopefully we will connect in Canton again this summer.
We will certainly see you in Canton for sure.
Sounds good.
Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Football Unlimited podcast. Until next time, be sure to follow and subscribe to all of FFU's social media accounts for daily content.